Okay, we're going to get started. So what high school you all from? I'm from San Francisco too, yay. Welcome. One very important announcement. Next week we will not be podcast. That's a certainty. The Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court will be here next week. That's a big one. I went to law school with her. I've never heard her speak, but she's very nice, and she's agreed to come. And she wants a lot of questions. She won't speak that long. We're still talking about exactly what the topic will be, but she's going to leave plenty of time for questions. So think of something like not how do you spell Chief Justice, okay? Like, think beyond that maybe, and what was your name again, all right? So you have some chance to think about it. Thank you, Jonah. All right, so that's next week. 2 weeks from today, special surprise guest. 3 weeks from today, spring break. And then, can you take out that Scantron? And then the final will be coming up at the end of April, April 30th. And this, a couple of people just asked me, the Scantron that you need for this class will look like this. Purple on this side, green on the other, okay? And I was just told by the poli-sci department this is probably the last year we'll be using this Scantron. So, memories. Speaking of memories, how many of you have heard Charles Wiley, our speaker today, speak to this class before? Only a couple of you. You're in for a treat. Charles Wiley is Mr. Political Science 179. We were just talking. He has been at this class for more years than you've been alive. Yes. Except you. Sorry about that, but yeah. Maybe you guys dated way back. But the point is, you never know. Was that wrong? He was a journalist for many, many years, and he covered the whole world. How many of you are from a foreign country? Where are you from? What? Germany. He's been there. Something a little more exotic than Germany. Way back. Brazil.
Where?
Brazil.
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
of course. Yeah, where else? Yeah. Costa Rica?
Yes.
Yes.
But I haven't spent much time because they never have any real problems down there to go cover.
Yeah, Israel. He's been to
Yes.
Israel. Yeah. Peru.
Peru, yes.
Spain, yeah. What? Taiwan.
Yes, many times. In fact, I've been to Kinman Island and Little Kinman Island also.
You lost all of us. Okay, go ahead. A few more. Go ahead. What? Guatemala.
Yes.
Okay. Azerbaijan.
No.
You win.
You got me.
Give the man a prize. All right. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. What? Boston? Did you say Pakistan? Pakistan.
Yeah, many.
Yeah, go ahead. South Africa.
What was that?
South Africa. South Africa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my. Are you guys just making this up? You're probably all from Oakland. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Denmark. Denmark.
Oh, yeah. That's Tivoli.
Wow, look at this. This is unbelievable. Go ahead. Guyana.
No. You got one that in fact, I've been in all the countries of South America except the three that are there together, Guyana and the other two.
Okay. All right, last two here. Go ahead. Bulgaria.
Yes, Sofia, yeah.
Burma? Oh,
Yeah.
Burma.
Yeah. When
Okay.
it was still Burma.
Oh, okay, right. And then Bosnia.
Yeah. By the way, what's the capital of Azerbaijan? I've forgotten.
Bless you.
What did you say? No, I'm curious.
I didn't hear it.
Oh. Say it again.
Yell it out. Baku.
Yes, you know what? I was there when it was still part of the Soviet Union. In fact, I was picked up in Baku by the local cops for taking pictures that they didn't like. I was taking pictures of people lined up at a meat store, and they thought that would put them in a bad light, so they put the arm on me. They only held me a few hours, but I was arrested there. And when I said no, I had forgotten, but Baku, yes.
Okay, go ahead. Iran?
Huh?
You've been to Iran.
Yeah.
And yeah. Where? Armenia.
No.
Okay.
You got two.
Yeah.
That last time they only got one.
Go ahead. Yemen.
No, damn.
Oh, they got you today.
Damn.
All right. Did you have one too or no? What? Mexico. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
All right.
About
Where?
a month ago.
Yeah. All right. And in his travels, he has seen all the luxury spots of the world, especially in Cuba, where Fidel hosted him in government housing.
Yes.
In other words, he was arrested and held in Cuba. So he's got great, whoa, there goes the voice. He's got some great stories to tell you, and he's going to talk to you about whatever he damn well pleases, because this is Charles Wiley.
There you go. I consider that. I asked Alan, I said, what's the theme this year? He said, never mind the theme, you can talk about what you want. And I really felt proud that he said that. By the way, because I'm an old guy, you know, I'm 87 now, Alan was asking me, and so many people, they say, you know, how did you manage to keep going the way you are? You seem to thrive as you get older. You just keep, you know, behaving the same. And I thought maybe I should give the secret out on how it's done. And so I'll let you in on it. There's two things that you do. It's that simple. One, you pick out parents with a good DNA. That's crucial. Right off the bat, you pick the right parents with the right DNA, and then you eat a lot of junk food. And if you just do those two things, you'll just keep on going like the Energizer Bunny. It's that simple. And by the way, I'll start out tonight. As you know, I never say anything controversial or that goes against political correctness in this class. And so I'll start out by saying that I have been thanking God every night for the atom bomb for the last week. And I mean that sincerely. I don't know that very many people have given it any thought. If you go back in the history of Europe, you will find World War I started because somebody shot a Duke somewhere that who cared about him one way or the other. But a whole lot of things happened and people started flexing their muscles, and soon this army was moving here and this army is moving here, and you had treaties, and the next thing you know, you had a dreadful, horrible war. And World War II, in a sense, started the same way. Hitler went here, then he went here, then they made treaties, and the next thing you know, you're at war. And this thing that's going on now, it's not going to end up in a war. And the reason it's not, absolutely, certainly will not end up in a meaningful, well, maybe a couple shots fired, but there is not going to be anything big. And the reason is there are atom bombs. Russia has atomic weapons. Nobody is going to start wars, real wars, in a world where there are atomic weapons. And so if there weren't atomic weapons out there, I would be very, very concerned about the situation, because these kind of things just escalate, and this happens, something that has nothing to do with anything, and suddenly it becomes very important. And I watched it happen in World War II. And so I am very thankful that people have atom bombs. That'll keep everybody from shooting at each other. That's a great thing. Last year I talked about something, and I wanted to upgrade it just a little. I talked about, I guess it was brought up in the Q&A, or maybe I mentioned it. I was talking about pornography, and I was talking about the fact that so many young men today spend their time, they have two things in life. They play computer games and they watch pornography. And that's not a great way to go out into the world. This is not a place that you're going to learn a whole lot of things that are going to help you through life. And in fact, what has happened with the pornography, and I've been warning about this for years, and that is that it started out as a substitute, in effect, for sex. And then it became a stimulant for sex. And now it has moved into a new thing. It is now in competition with normal sex. And when you get a society that has reached the point where you have competition for normal sex, you got a society that's in a lot of trouble. And I would just say I track that stuff pretty closely. Not that I look at it, I just see what's happening. But in any case, I see that the manga, the Japanese magazines that have so much pornography, are going into high gear. And apparently there is going to be a flood of new information on pornography or pornography itself coming from Japan. So you can watch for that coming along in the very near future. Now, one of the things that I've talked about in this class in the past, normally I talk about news media. And I talk about the power of the news media, the fact that they have more influence than the President of the United States or Congress or anybody else. The news media pretty much decides what we think about, what we talk about. The news media pretty much decides what are the problems that we're going to try to solve and the priorities we're going to give, the order in which we're going to try to solve them. Because when the media puts the spotlight on a problem, that's the problem that the politicians then go to work on. And so basically what happens is the news media is deciding what problems you're going to try to solve. That's incredible power. And I've talked about that many times, and I've talked about the fact that there are two kinds of reporters out there. There are those who are objective, that are trying to bring you news, and they're trying to bring you knowledge. They're trying to inform you. They think that they are supposed to gather information, pass it on to you. That's what we call news. They take those things they think, one, that you're interested in, and two, that you need to know. And they think that when they bring a story to you, that they are to give you all the main facts. And if there's more than one side, to give you both sides. That's what an objective reporter is all about. And then we have advocate journalists. An advocate journalist, when they're reporting on things that they feel are important to them, they are a different breed of cat. They may be the same as an objective reporter when they're covering stories that they don't care about. But when they cover stories that they feel strongly about, for example, if they're covering the local mayor's race and they like this guy and they don't like this guy, then it changes. And at that point in the game, advocate journalists are not trying to inform. They're trying to influence you. And I might say that you are bombarded by so-called news by advocate journalists, which is really slanted news. I've gone over that many times. I've talked about the various ways that you slant stories, and I've always ended up by pointing out that the most common way that news is slanted is not by lying, it is by what you don't report. Any good reporter, any good writer can take any subject that you want. I can write you 1,000 words. Give me a subject, I'll write you 1,000 words, and every single one of them, every word in there will be 100% true. And yet, when you finish the story, you will have it completely wrong by what I left out. I can put in fact, 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 fact. But if I leave out this, or if I leave out this, it can change the entire picture. And I've talked about that so many times, and what I've done tonight is to bring something that is going to be a lesson in history for you, because you're now going to see how history can be distorted by advocate journalists who simply don't report something. And so what I want to talk about is Vietnam, the war in Vietnam. Now, I covered that war. I was there 4 different times during a 10-year period as a reporter covering the war in Vietnam. And I was there after the war to see what it looked like. But I'm not going to talk about anything that I did over there. That happened 1,000 miles away. Now, there was a lot of distorted news there. But what I'm going to talk about is the coverage of what was happening, not in Vietnam, but the coverage of what was happening in the streets of America. And by the way, this is the best place in the world that I could talk about it, because Berkeley contributed mightily to the news as to what the people were doing and what was happening at that time. There are 3 things that are believed by the overwhelming majority of the American people. 3. 1, During and after the war in Vietnam, the American people turned their backs on our troops. That when they came back, they were treated badly by many people, they were insulted, even spit at, and the whole. That is believed by the overwhelming majority of the American people, including probably a lot of veterans. Number two, the basic belief is that there were anti-war demonstrations on every street corner, and there was nothing to answer. There was nobody out there demonstrating to show support for the troops that were fighting in Vietnam. Now, if you took any history in high school or college that went into Vietnam, that's what you've been taught. If you've seen movies about it, anything that has to do with Vietnam, that is the general picture. And the third thing is that Vietnam was the war in which there was no brass band to welcome our men home, that they came home to almost a hostile country, and that unlike World War I or World War II, there was no parade to welcome them home. That is probably believed by 90-some% of all the veterans. And they're not bitter about it, but they feel left out. They know that after World War I and World War II, we had the big parade through the canyons of Wall Street. You've all seen the pictures of the ticker tape coming down and so on. And the belief system is there was no. That's three things. They were treated badly, there was no support shown for them during the war, and number three, there was no big parade to welcome them back. I would be willing to bet 90% of the American people believe that. And it's absolute nonsense. Not one of those things is true. It did not happen. If you go home and ask your parents and your grandparents, they'll tell you in all probability that that's what happened. And the reason is that they don't know. And you can have even more fun. You can go to all your history teachers. If you ever go back to your high school, you can go talk to your history teachers in high school or your history teachers here. And don't blame them for not knowing, because they were taught the same wrong nonsense. And so I'm going to go over those three things, and I think that you'll find it interesting. People who are older find it even more interesting because they believe those things, and when they see some of the stuff that I show them, they're stunned by it. By the way, the first one, I don't have to show you anything. I can just let everybody sit in their chair, and we can disprove the first one. They say that the American people treated them badly. They were hostile to them. They called them names and so on. Think of every single person in your family that was around during the war in Vietnam. Grandparents, parents, uncles, aunts, anybody in the family that was around during the war in Vietnam. And then think of all your friends, any friends you have, or teachers that you have, or anybody that's old enough to have been around during the war in Vietnam. And then after you've kind of put them up on a screen in your mind, ask yourself a question. Which one of them would have been not nice to a veteran coming back from a war? And I've asked audiences of 1,000 people that question. Once in a while I get one hand or I get two hands, because nobody else can think of anybody like that. By the way, is there anybody here that has anybody in their family or any friends that they have that they think would have been not nice to a soldier coming home from the war? It's ridiculous. It is absolutely absurd. And yet that is what we have taught 2 generations of young Americans. It just didn't happen. What did happen is there was a relative handful of fanatics. And they were out there day and night, and the news media played them up. There were a handful of people that used to go to the airport at San Francisco. There were a handful that went to the airport in Los Angeles. And there was another bunch that went up to the Seattle airport. Because during the war in Vietnam, the men came home, not as units, not together, but as individuals. They were sent there, they served a year, they came home, Most of the time they came back on civilian aircraft by themselves, and so they would get off a plane, either San Francisco, Los Angeles, or Seattle. And this little group of people, a half a dozen people, used to go down there every day, and they would jeer at them and call them names. How in the hell did that little handful of people become the spokesman for our population? It is utterly nonsense. And there were little groups of people, 20 people, that would go out to a base somewhere on a weekend, and they would stand outside, and as troops went in or out, they would yell at them. Again, we're talking about 1,000th of 1% of the American population. And somehow all of that, because of the media coverage, ended up with us having a guilt trip as a people because we mistreated our servicemen. We didn't mistreat our servicemen. That's just not so. Now, the second thing, during the war in Vietnam, the biggest demonstrations were not anti-war demonstrations. The biggest demonstrations during the Vietnam War were demonstrations to show support for the men that were fighting. Now, I'm going to repeat that. I said it exactly the way it is so. People think, oh, he's saying it backward. The biggest demonstrations were demonstrations to show support for the troops. And when I say big, I'm talking about huge demonstrations. How about the third longest parade in the history of America? The third longest parade ever, lasted 8 hours and 50 minutes. If you can imagine a parade lasting that long. 250,000 people marched in that parade. That parade was called the Support Our Men in Vietnam Parade. Bigger than anything the anti-war people ever did. And we had 3 networks in that time, no cable, and 3 networks. Not one of the 3 networks gave 1 second of coverage to the third longest parade in American history with 250,000 people in it showing support for our troops that were fighting in Vietnam. And there were many, many huge activities like that. Now, if our young man can do it, punch up the thing, it's under the support of our troops, and it says, support our men in Vietnam, and let's see if we can get that on. If this works, you're going to see 2.5 minutes of the third longest parade in America in support of the men that were fighting the war, right dead smack in the middle of the war. Ah, there you go. Can you get the sound on it if you can?
And this is the way it has been since the parade got underway at 12:30 this afternoon. Boys and girls, men and women, marching down and, in this instance, riding down Fifth Avenue. 250,000 people will be marching in this parade before the last marcher passes down Fifth Avenue. Just look at that. The people are giving voice to their sentiments. And we zoom up, 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 always up Fifth Avenue. As far as the eye can see, these people are marching in support of our boys in Vietnam. These banners, as you can see, so many of them, handmade. But you can be sure their hearts are in every stitch. These are the young people now, giving voice to their feelings. Win in Vietnam. Let's go all the way with the USA. This is the Teamster contingent. 15,000 strong. 10,000 ILA longshoremen. 6,000 carpenters. New York Fire Department on parade here in Fifth Avenue. And this banner,
There you go. Can you imagine? Nobody outside of the place where the parade was held knew about it. I've checked papers from one end of the country to the other. It wasn't there. When I have nothing to do, I'm in Sacramento or San Diego or Wyoming somewhere, I'll go to the local library and check the paper for the day after that parade. Zero, zilch. Third longest parade in American history. And there were many, many parades like that. That was not alone. Let me give you another example of how the media covered. The biggest demonstration the anti-war people probably ever put together was they marched on Washington, and they had between 35,000 and 100,000 people, depending upon who you wanted to listen to. The same weekend that they did that march on Washington, there was a thing called Operation Gratitude, which was a series of events to show support for the men fighting in Vietnam. The biggest of the programs that week were in the New York City area. In the New York City area, there were 5 different parades on that weekend. There was one in Brooklyn, one in Westchester County, and one in Staten Island. And the third longest parade in the history of the state of New Jersey was held that weekend in Newark, New Jersey. The longest parade in the history of the state. All of this was to support our men in Vietnam. You know, the ones that everybody turned their backs on. Hit the Operation Gratitude on there. There it is. Look at that headline. Hundreds of thousands joined back GI feats here. That's hundreds of thousands of people were involved in one weekend in demonstrations to show support. Now, how did the national media cover this? Well, Time magazine covered both events. The cover of magazine, and at this point in the game, under study of bias, there it is. There you go, there's Time magazine. That is a picture of Washington, D.C., and obviously that is the demonstrators in Washington. Now, inside Time magazine that week, they had 9 pages of coverage of the anti-war movement. 9 pages. Did they cover what happened in New York where the hundreds of thousands had demonstrated? Yep, they covered them. They covered them with one sentence, 31 words, buried in the middle of the 9 pages so that nobody ever saw it. And what they said about the hundreds of thousands, at home, thousands of Americans backed Operation Gratitude. Notice, not hundreds of thousands, thousands. A grassroots effort to show support for U.S. troops in Vietnam through all-night vigils and round-the-clock displays of lights. That's it. For hundreds of thousands of people in 5 parades, one of which is the longest in the history of the state, people turning on their car headlights everywhere until every street virtually in the New York area was ablaze in light. One estimate was 90% of all the cars on the road. Every bus, the bus drivers union. Every cab, the cab drivers union. Every truck, the Teamsters union. All of them joined in to show support. And that's the coverage it got from Time magazine. One sentence of 31 words compared to 9 pages on the other side. Newsweek did a little better. Newsweek had 2 sentences about what happened in the New York area, and this is unbelievable. Predictably, the anti-war demonstration begat a scattering of loyalist parades, vigils, and religious services across the country under the sponsorship of the National Committee for Responsible Patriotism. And then this, which posted messages of blessing from Richard Nixon and Barry Goldwater. Now, Richard Nixon at that time had just been defeated to be the governor of this state, and Barry Goldwater had run for president a couple of years before and got beat. So they said that the people that were involved in the hundreds of thousands, they received the blessings of those two guys. That's all it says. And then it says, in Battery Park at the tip of New York City, 2,000 people showed up for a 2-day vigil. And elsewhere, motorists solemnly complied with a request by the patriotism group to drive with their headlights on as a show of sympathy. Absolute nonsense. Those two sentences are just stupid. First of all, they mentioned two people who had announced their support. The truth of the matter is that 2/3 of all the governors of the states of the United States of America, 2/3 of the governors, 30-some governors, had supported those demonstrations. And hundreds of congressmen, mayors, and people like that, and Newsweek put down 2 names. This is the kind of coverage that we got during that war. That is why your history books are simply incorrect. That's not what happened. And I get to the last of the 3 things. Everybody knows we didn't have a parade to welcome our men home. They normally point out there was no brass band to welcome them when they got back. Well, you want to flash that picture? That's as big as we can get it. There you go, folks. That is March the 31st, 1973. That is the day the war ended in Vietnam. The last American troops were taken out of Vietnam on March 31st, 1973. The only military left were the Marine Guards at our embassy. The entire, all brought back. On the very day that the war ended, that is Times Square, New York City. That is the parade welcoming our men home that you were taught in school didn't happen. Not only have we been told it didn't happen, the American people who are old enough to remember are on a guilt trip to this day because we didn't have a parade for our men. And yet, there it is, folks. There's the parade. If you go under the picture, there's a welcome home parade. Hit that one. Troops, people. By the way this thing worked, the 1,000 men led the parade, 2-mile parade route, people on the side, you can see cheering, waving, flag waving. New York City welcomed them. What happened, though, after they finished the parade route was what was amazing. Something happened that never happened in any other parade after a war. They set up grandstands for the 1,000 men. And the 1,000 men sat down in the grandstands, and while they sat there, gals with red, white, and blue sashes served them refreshments for hours. And then afterwards, they were taken to a $100 a plate dinner with top entertainers to welcome them home. After they sat down, over 150,000 people marched the 2-mile parade route behind the veterans so that they could salute them. Have you ever heard of a parade where the military sat in the grandstand and the people marched by them instead of the other way around? That's what happened in New York City on the day that the war ended. Alan, you can remember? No, you can't quite remember the Vietnam War, can you? Like that. Did you have any idea there was a parade like that? I have asked thousands of people, virtually nobody. I gave a speech to 1,400 officers at the Naval Postgraduate School a few years ago, and I was telling them this stuff. And I said, how many of you knew that there was a parade to welcome our military home? One hand out of 1,400 officers. And after I was finished, he came over to me and he said, "Sir, I'm the guy that put up his hand. I thought maybe you'd like to know how come I knew about the parade." And I said, "Yeah, that's interesting." He said, "I was in one of the high school bands that marched in it." By the way, they say there was no brass band to welcome our men home from Vietnam. 100 brass bands were in the parade through Times Square to welcome our men home from Vietnam. You want to know how much power the news media has? Do you see what you can do by just not reporting? To their credit, ABC News gave 28 seconds coverage in a single newscast to this parade. CBS blacked it out completely. NBC blacked it out completely. CBS headquarters is 4 blocks from where the parade went. They didn't send a camera crew 4 blocks after a bitter war to show our men coming home and being greeted like this. NBC, 2 blocks. And they didn't even have to leave their building. They're in the RCA building. All they had to do was take a camera, get on the elevator, and go to one of the higher floors. They could have shot the parade into Times Square right from their building. And they didn't do it. And so you were taught, and the generation before you was taught, we didn't have a parade. Go to any veterans group. If you have an American Legion or a VFW, any place where you live, go in and ask the veterans in there, did you have a parade after the war? I'll guarantee you, you are almost positive to have everyone tell you no. The number of veterans that know about it is insignificantly small. The number of people. And that's what happens when you have a news media. In fact, year before last, on Memorial Day, they had a program in Washington where they celebrated the military, and 2 different people on the same show, Gary Sinise, the actor, and Colin Powell, the general. Both of them made a comment about what a shame it was that the Vietnam veterans didn't have a parade when they came home. Nobody knows about it. The news media kept it a secret. And so this is the kind of thing, and I just will close by reading to you, and we could put that up, but it doesn't make any difference. I will read this to you. It's a lot easier. This is the Fort Dix Post. Fort Dix was the military base that was nearest to New York, where they had Army people, and each one of the services had 240 men in the parade, and the 240 from the Army came from Fort Dix. So their newspaper wrote up the story, and it's called The Parade. They had the Home with Honor parade in New York City last Saturday. 1,000 servicemen, including 240 soldiers from Fort Dix, marched up Broadway and then continued on to Central Park West. Once there, they became grand marshals of the parade, entered the stands, and reviewed the parade of upwards of 150,000 firemen, policemen, veterans, hard hats, and just plain people. The parade was sponsored by the Home with Honor Committee to honor those who fought. There were good vibrations in New York Saturday, spontaneous displays of warmth and appreciation everywhere between the marchers and the crowd and the servicemen. Staff Sergeant David Williams, the Army key man, put it, "Today the people of New York showed that they love us." All of the servicemen were volunteers from each service, not the you, and you volunteer, but real volunteers. They were Vietnam veterans proud of their service who chose the parade over having the day off. It had to be one of the most unusual parades ever. When is the last time you saw military men on the reviewing stand watching civilians march by? And whenever did you see group after group of paraders stop to cheer the reviewing party and be cheered in return? Some anonymous hard hat in the parade tossed his hat to one of the soldiers as a souvenir, and by parade's end, most of the servicemen had a hard hat's hard hat. Flags, flags, flags everywhere. Majorettes, pom-pom girls, snappy salutes, and hot dogs. And the line I'm going to read to you now, I've read hundreds of times, and every time I read it, it almost brings tears to my eyes. The Home with Honor Committee said, the men and women who have served the United States during the war have come home with honor, and history will not record that there were no brass bands to greet them. And they put 100 brass bands on Broadway through Times Square, and your history books reported that there were no brass bands to greet them. How wrong can you be? And then it just has a whole bunch of comments, different military people, the best thing that could have happened, a beautiful parade. I've never been honored like this before in my life. I was impressed because the whole thing seemed so genuine. I thought the parade was outstanding. I was surprised and overwhelmed by the appreciation the people of New York City displayed. I remember how I felt overseas when I heard about all the demonstrations and the negative publicity. Everything seemed to be negative then. But you come back to something like this and it doesn't matter what happened or what's been said in the past. You just enjoy it the moment. It's tremendous. And so you can get this yourself online. You can read it in detail. There's a lot more. It's still in formation. We just put it together recently, and we're going to put a lot more stuff, and we're going to make it a lot better. But there's a lot of material there. All you have to do is hit www.ncrp. That's November, Charlie, Romeo, Papa, .us. It's not org or com, it's US. And if you get that, you will get everything that I've showed you and a lot more. And I think that's a good place to stop. You now know that the news media can totally distort reality to the point of the absurd. And this is about as absurd as you could get when you now have a country that believes things that didn't happen, and don't know about things that were this big. Hey. Oh, thank you.
Go right here. Go ahead. Real loud. Why should we believe you over the news media?
I just showed you the pictures, kid. What the hell do you want me to do? I mean, what more do you want from me? You think I made up the pictures?
All right, question 2, go ahead. He says everyone knows the media is biased. So what's the point? But does everyone know that?
Well, I think that you have a point in the sense that every poll that's been taken shows overwhelmingly the American people no longer trust the media to give them all the news. You're correct. However, you've got to pick out some specific things where you can show how important. The fact that they did not cover one side of the biggest debate in this country in the last half century is incredibly important. This was not leaving out who won the Oscar. This had to do with life and death for thousands of people and a nation. I mean, this changed world history. Not only did it change world history as it's reported, because it's reported incorrectly in every book that you could get your hand. I don't think you could find a history book in America that has it right. So that's important, and even if people know that a lot, I think this brings it out, especially to older people. People who can remember that period, they are stunned. Veterans are stunned to find this stuff out.
Lou.
Do you think that being anti-war and supporting the troops themselves are mutually exclusive?
Is it mutually exclusive to be anti-war and support the troops?
Of course, it's not exclusive. They're almost all of the anti-war, I'm not talking about the guys on the campus here that were just students that were activists. I'm talking about any of the political figures. Governors, there were a couple of governors. The mayor of New York was John Lindsay, very anti-war. But John Lindsay, as all of the rest of them, said that this has nothing to do with our troops. We support our troops. In fact, one of the things the anti-war people did all the time was to put up signs that said, we support our troops in Vietnam. We want to bring them home so they won't be killed. And that was the thing. The people that were at these airports did not represent the anti-war movement. They represented a handful of fanatics. The anti-war people overwhelmingly, I mean, in all those people I asked them to think about, all the relatives and friends, a lot of those people, I'm sure, that they think about were anti-war. I was against the war in Iraq. I was dead set against the war. Alan will remember I was screaming, don't go in. Now, when we did go into the war, I was a USO entertainer when I was 15 years old during World War II. I was one of the earliest USO entertainers. Those are the people that went from base to base entertaining the troops. I spent the first year, because I couldn't join the service, I was too young. Because I was an actor, I was able to go to work for the USO. And so I had been in the USO. When we invaded Iraq, a war that I was dead smack against, one of the first things I did was I contacted the USO. And I said, hey, if you want to get some publicity, send me over there for a couple of weeks. Doesn't make any difference whether I'm any good or not. The main thing is you can get some publicity and say, here's a guy, he entertained their grandparents, now he's over there entertaining them. I was gung-ho against the war. What has that got to do with how I feel about the people that are wearing the uniform of my country?
Not cover it because we weren't winning.
No, actually, we won up until we lost. No, I mean, the United States, we won every single battle of any significance, and no matter what part of it you look at, we won. And General Giap, the commander of the other side, admitted, for example, that the Tet Offensive was a disaster for them. But it was reported in the media here as a defeat for us, which was absolute nonsense. It was crazy. But that it wasn't that, you know what, I can't really answer, and the question that comes up all the time, why didn't the media cover? And I can't answer that because the only people that can really answer that are the editors, the assignment editors, the people that were in charge of the various media. If they were still around, I'd love to get the people that put together that Time magazine and gave 9 pages to one sentence. I'd like to ask them, why the hell did you do that? But I have great regrets that at the time that this was going on, that I didn't get every one of those people on the record somewhere and say, excuse me, sir, you were in charge of CBS, why didn't you send a camera to take pictures of these incredible events? But I didn't, neither did anybody else that I know of.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock. So next week, Supreme Court Chief Justice, please tell people to come. Thank you to Charles Wiley for coming out today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ask your questions, come on up and meet Charlie, and I'll see you all next week.